This is your daily dose of all things royal. What if I told you that the people who are making a living deciding what you're allowed to say, read, and think are currently taking a victory lap and gloating? In a recent address to fellow disinformation researchers at the Cambridge Disinformation Summit that happened this past April, Center for Countering Digital Hate, the CCDH, co-founder and CEO Imran Ahmed, delivered what amounted to a massive victory speech. It's sickening. He told his assembled audience of woke progressive elites that their long campaign to dismantle online speech protections has finally reached the enforcement phase. But critics, like Mike Benz and many others, including myself, of this so-called disinformation industry, know exactly what this is. It's a sprawling network of leftist progressive NGOs, regulators, and academics working in concert to impose centralized speech controls under the banner of safety. Today, I'm going to go ahead and break down the first 10 minutes of Imran Ahmed's slick, self-serving propaganda, and we're going to look at his recent public remarks, contrast them with what he's put on record with congressional investigators, and expose how these professional censors get caught in their own web of dishonesty when forced to define the very word they use to silence you. If that sounds like a plan, go ahead and hit that like button and let's dive in. So Imran Ahmed's session begins with this slide, and the irony is just breathtaking. They open the session encouraging the civil debate of unfavored ideas while literally sitting in an elite echo chamber and turning the YouTube comments off. Make that make sense.
It's a privilege to be speaking here today in halls I indeed sat in as a student. And please forgive me for speaking through a screen. It's something I regret. I promise I have a better excuse than the ones I used here when I was late for supervisions or didn't do an essay. On December the 23rd last year, the US State Department sanctioned 5 Europeans for their work holding social media and AI companies to account. It instructed ICE to arrest and detain any present on American soil. I am one of those 5. And the only one in the United States. I'm now fighting in federal court against that unconstitutional threat to send me to a prison. I've already won a restraining order preventing my detention. However, my attorneys have warned that if I leave the United States, I would not be allowed to return. To my home, to my wife, to my 2 daughters, one 19 months old, the other 5 weeks old. And what was my crime? Advocacy.
I couldn't help but laugh and roll my eyes at this. He opens up his speech with this massive sob story. He paints himself as a persecuted martyr, sanctioned by the U.S. State Department, facing pushback, claiming he's doing it all for the noble crime of advocacy. I swear, it's like all of them came out of the same factory, this poor acting. You can't possibly take this seriously, especially after what we've all witnessed and have gone through. There's a reason why Mark Rubio sanctioned this guy. The U.S. government sanctions targeted exactly what Ahmed whines and complains about. Organized foreign-led efforts to coerce, demonetize, and suppress American viewpoints. When platforms cave to his pressure, he calls it accountability. But when the U.S. government pushes back on a foreign national meddling in American speech, suddenly he's the victim. He cries persecution. And the thing that gets under my skin listening to this guy is the tone that he takes on. It's sanctimonious, it's holier than thou, and also very sinister because it is totally dishonest.
Holding powerful companies to account. Sometimes embarrassing them by exposing their own failures. Being good at it.
Being good at it.
So I'm not speaking to you as an observer of this fight. I'm speaking to you as a combatant and a willing one. After all, I could have complied. I could have resigned, apologized, or self-deported quietly. I chose not to.
So now here is where the story completely falls apart. These so-called radical leftist activists love a good hero story, and Ahmed has spent quite a few years telling a deeply dramatic, compressed public narrative about how the CCDH was born.
To explain why, let me tell you how I got here. In 2015, I was working in the Palace of Westminster as a political advisor to Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary Hilary Benn. From inside my party, I watched with horror the rise of a virulent anti-Semitism, driven in part by shadowy Facebook groups spreading ancient lies to hundreds of thousands of party members. A few months later, as a senior advisor to Labour's Remain campaign in the EU referendum, I saw the same dynamics at work. Conspiracy theories and lies, a version of the Great Replacement theory in which the EU was importing Muslims and Africans to destroy the white race, spreading at a speed and scale that traditional media could never match. And then 2 weeks before that vote came the murder of my colleague Jo Cox. Outside her constituency surgery. She was shot twice in the head, once in the chest, and stabbed 15 times. Her killer was a white supremacist who had fed on a steady diet of hate and lies online.
Crazy how this guy is speaking at a disinformation summit while here he is, the most cynical part of this routine, and how he's using emotional blackmail and a completely falsified history to shut down any public debate. This is so grotesque. Like, Imran Ahmed is tying not only his quote-unquote life's work as well as the organization's purpose to a tragic murder that is backed by an ultimate deception of a completely false claim that this killer was quickly radicalized by the online space. This is a complete fabrication. The official evidence from Thomas Mayer's 2016 trial completely destroys Imran Ahmed's narrative here. Mayer wasn't just a victim of modern social media algorithms. He was a deeply entrenched, lifelong neo-Nazi whose radicalization predated the modern internet entirely. The official records show that Mayer was writing letters to pro-apartheid magazines as far back as 1991. And furthermore, in 1999, years before Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter even existed, police and tracking organizations proved Mayer was spending hundreds of dollars buying bomb-making manuals, improvised munition guides, and Nazi tracks directly from the US-based white supremacist group, the National Alliance. So where does social media come into play here? Ahmed is shamelessly weaponizing a horrific tragedy by rewriting the historical facts of the case. He invents this fake online radicalization timeline to scare the public into believing the open internet is a murder machine, all to justify his corporate censorship regime. This is spectacular dishonesty.
Her killer was a white supremacist who had fed on a steady diet of hate and lies online. Jo was a member of Parliament, a mother of two. But those of us who knew her knew she was among the best of us. That day, consoling devastated colleagues while trying to contain my own tears, I realized something. We had allowed the world to change profoundly, and we had done it without consent, without guardrails, And without fully comprehending the nature, the scale, the sheer velocity of change.
And the Oscar goes to...
It led me to ask a question I could no longer ignore. How is it that toxic and false narratives can spread so quickly, so widely, and so intimately in digital spaces that they can drive a person to murder an innocent woman in broad daylight?
Liar, liar, liar.
What I found over the following months and years was that this was not random. It was not accidental. It was the product of systems designed and incentivized to reward outrage, division, and extremity. Because those things drive engagement, and engagement drives revenue.
Money makes the world go around, the world go around, the world go around. Money makes the world go around, of that we can be sure.
Like, I find this so gross. You're taking the death of this MP as the immediate direct catalyst for this whack company that he's claiming he founded. He claims that very day he had a moral awakening about toxic online narratives, which led him straight to founding CCDH. I mean, it's clean, it's emotional, and it frames this censorship work as a holy crusade to reduce violence. Meanwhile, not only his lawsuit against the Department of State tell a slightly different version using 9/11 to pull on the heartstrings, but then explicitly admits to Congress in his interview on June 25th, 2024, that after leaving Parliament, he's spent 3 full years as a private citizen doing odd communications jobs and independent quote-unquote self-study. He didn't rush out to save the world from online hate because of this tragedy.
And the consequences are now measurable. Last week, the Gallup and Kettering Foundation reported that among Americans who spend 5 or more hours a day on social media, only 57% say democracy is the best form of government. They are nearly 3 times as likely to say political violence is sometimes justified. All of this was possible, perhaps even inevitable, because we built almost no meaningful accountability for the harms these systems caused. No transparency into the way they worked. We allowed private platforms to shape public life while disclaiming any responsibility for the consequences.
The scary thing about these people is that they're always targeting the youth. And given that there were people sitting in that room to listen to this garbage, they too probably have the same worldview of what should be done with the online space, just because so many people like this are shoved in their faces. Now, here's this guy who is turning a tragic murder by a deranged individual into the foundational of why for his organization. Imran Ahmed attempts to shut down all debate. If you question his arbitrary definitions of disinformation, he wants the public to think you are siding with the political violence. Same thing goes for Meghan and Harry using the alleged stories of people who lost their lives blaming social media. No one can say for sure that those stories on the parents' network are all legitimate because Harry and Meghan are known to be deceptive. And just like this guy Imran Ahmed making up stories and changing history, this is so eye-opening to me. We see this playbook time and time again by these people who are driving this regulation. They don't care if they're lying to the world. They don't. They're going to use and exploit tragedy as well as vulnerable people to make their point across that this is the way to go. And who is going to push back on it, right? People don't want to have the stigma of being a racist or someone who doesn't want to protect children or someone who doesn't want to support veterans. I mean, you name it. Harry and Meghan and people like Imran Ahmed use it and weaponize it and then have the audacity to cry victim when they're called out on it. Now, I don't think it's wrong to say that these divisive foreign operatives completely ignore the fact that violence being seen has incredibly complex causes like mental illness, deep ideological radicalization, whether it be coming from a university. Nobody's blaming the education system or their home environment. Instead, they selectively apply these labels of hate and disinformation to suppress views they simply don't like. Just look at how the online Sussex Squad has been used to target everyday critics, how we have been attacked.
And then there's litigation. 2 weeks ago, a New Mexico jury ordered Meta to pay $375 million for knowingly harming children's mental health and concealing what it knew about child sexual exploitation on its platforms. The very next day, a jury in Los Angeles found Meta and YouTube negligent for designing products that harmed children. That case is a bellwether for thousands more. 2 verdicts, 2 days. 2 juries of ordinary Americans saying, enough. And on the same day as the New Mexico verdict, Baltimore became the first major American city to sue XAI over harms tied to Grok, explicitly citing evidence produced by CCDH. Courts are now asking a question that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. Did the design of this product cause this harm? And it means these companies are no longer being treated as neutral conduits. They are treated instead as designers, as manufacturers, as actors responsible for what their systems produce.
The Sussex Squad, who have long harassed the platforms, mass reported anyone who criticized Harry and Meghan, are now rebranding themselves as rising to the occasion to meet the tidal wave of misinformation, racism, and coordinated online harassment with fact-checking, digital organizing spelled in the British way, and unshakable solidarity. They've written a book on Amazon called Crown, Clicks, and Combat. So they are actively trying to rebrand themselves as heroes, putting up things like this. They try to make it sound like they're just the heroes coming in for alleged, organized hatred. They're still pushing that lie when they're the ones who are organized. And obviously continuing to push this, it just proves to me that obviously the Sussex Squad are part of this whole black ops for CCDH and the British censorship.
Yeah, I have to agree with this. There's a concerted effort to turn this around and make it look like they are doing advocacy work. It's exactly what we're seeing Imran Ahmed doing here. They frame the open internet as a murder machine to make you feel complicit unless you support their strict regulatory regime. Giving up your freedom by saying, no, we can't decide for ourselves. We need the government, or we need you, Imran, because your NGO is so unbiased and so honest and ethical that we trust you to tell us what we should believe, what we should say, and how we should think. And the target focus now brings us to talking about Section 230. For those that don't know, this law exists precisely so platforms aren't held liable for every single user post. Ahmed and his network are cheering for bipartisan proposals to gut it.
We allowed private platforms to shape public life while disclaiming any responsibility for the consequences. And that moral immunity was reified into statute by measures such as Section 230 in the United States and the e-commerce directive in Europe. I have spent nearly a decade now trying to end that age of accountability. And for years that often felt like howling into the wind. But for the first time, friends, I believe the wind has changed. And it is truly, finally, at our backs. You see, that's how I read the events of the past few years. Not as a story of setback, but as a story of progress.
I think we all understand that the forces behind this evil agenda definitely don't like free speech, and they know that it is the wrench in stopping this global takeover by these supranational bodies like the United Nations, like the World Health Organization. You see, over the course of time, sovereignty has been given up to these powers, more so in Europe than here in the United States. But still, these are people who have been trying to take over the global population and decide how we live. Since Donald Trump came onto the scene, misinformation and disinformation all of a sudden became a thing. And at the World Economic Forum, I think in the last couple of years, citing misinformation and disinformation as the bulk of the world's problems. What it boils down to is that these globalist psychopaths want to control everybody's reality. So here you have Ahmed claiming the real problem is that platforms are designed for outrage. Like, this is how they were built. They were built to make people annoyed, pissed off, and irritated, right? That's in their mind, the narrative that they're selling the public. But you see, the problem that they have that they don't want to admit is that these control freaks hate the fact that it's user driven. So it's the user who makes the choice on what they read and what they see. They also hate that the engagement of what they see as disfavored speech and narratives are also driving revenue. They feel like if you don't have the same mindset and not singing the same tune, you shouldn't be able to make any kind of money from that. This is the exact mindset that Meghan Markle has. Like, if you're not sycophantic over her and not praising and complimenting and worshiping her, that's it. You need to be cut off. Like, you shouldn't be able to breathe or live. They want you canceled and exiled from society. Look what happened when Piers Morgan said he didn't believe that Meghan wanted to unalive herself. I don't believe it either. But he ended up losing his job over saying it. And we cannot forget Yankee Wally. They literally wanted that woman dead. Yes, it's no secret that these platforms optimize for attention. I mean, that's how human attention works. But here's the reality of human nature that they don't want to accept. People express emotions, some stronger than others. What Ahmed and his little cronies actually want isn't high-quality discourse. What they want, I think we know this already from watching Meghan Markle, is that they want content curated. They want voices de-amplified or removed according to the definitions that these leftist progressive NGOs and captured regulators set. You got to ask the question, who the F are these people to decide what we're allowed to see, know, or allowed to think about it and express it? I think the core problem that we have here is that this is a clash of fundamental values. You notice the left are not God-fearing. For many of us who have a Christian foundation, we believe here in America, our rights, our ability to speak and think freely are the gifts bestowed by our Creator. I talk about this many times. The First Amendment protects those God-given rights. But you see, these architects of this censorship machine operate without any moral grounding. Ahmed himself has admitted to being an atheist. So, the way that I see it is that when you lack a respect for a higher power, it becomes very easy to view yourself as the ultimate authority, playing God with what the public is allowed to know. And sadly, we see this lack of strong moral pushback from institutions that should know better. Even King Charles has allowed the erosion of traditional values and freedoms under his watch.
In 2019, I founded CCDH to do what platforms and lawmakers could not or would not do: speak truth to power in defense of truth, science, and democracy. In 2021, I was the opening witness before a joint committee of Parliament drafting the Online Safety Act. And in 2023, the UK Online Safety Act and the EU Digital Services Act became law. For the first time, anywhere in the world, platforms were being treated as accountable actors. And in December 2025, British and European authorities began using those powers in earnest. The EU fined X €120 million for violating the Digital Services Act. Ofcom opened an investigation into the proliferation of anti-Semitism on social media platforms after the terror attack on a synagogue in Manchester. And on December the 16th, in the United States, a bipartisan proposal to sunset Section 230 was introduced in the Senate. A week later, the State Department sanctioned me. So I do not see evidence that accountability is failing. I see evidence that accountability is beginning to bite.
These greedy bitches want to see 230 fall because platforms will be forced to censor aggressively to avoid ruinous lawsuits. And the way that they're getting around it is using the kids and crying mental health and framing it now, not so much as, the liability rests on the platforms for the content, but looking at these platforms as products. This is how they're getting around it. As I've shown previously, Mike Benz has brilliantly pointed out that this isn't about accountability. It's about stripping sovereignty away from private companies and handing that power over to the NGOs who will do the dirty work of these governments and making it look like, we're not infringing on anybody's free speech. You can't be any more corrupt when you see Ofcom awarding CCDH as an approved flagger to watch over and moderate X. What irks me the most here is seeing the glee on this guy's face, boasting about his wins and how he affected these regulations like the Online Safety Bill and the Digital Services Act. It's gross because, it's not about keeping the world safe. This is about power and about bragging how he's made change and, have done something with his life.
Backlash is not proof of failure. It is proof of impact. And that is why those who built their power on opacity and impunity are now fighting, like Canute, to command the tide to turn back. Zuckerberg standing on a dais in this city, Washington, D.C., with a rictus grin, like a hostage after dismantling years of safety protections overnight. Musk suing researchers, including my centre, for publishing evidence. And governments taking action against activists for holding powerful companies to account. They're not doing this because they feel safe. They are doing it because the pressure is working and they feel profoundly unsafe. For years, accountability was an argument. Now it is becoming a system.
Now, this is why we need to pay attention to this. Imran's speech at Cambridge is the standard script of the censorship class. Invoke tragedy, distort the timeline, use arbitrary definitions, and frame any pushback as proof you are winning. But let me tell you something. The U.S. government sanctions were a long overdue recognition that this isn't harmless academic advocacy. Let's call it what it is. It's foreign interference in American discourse dressed up in moral language. The real threat to our Constitution isn't Elon Musk allowing more speech. The threat is people successfully exporting European-style speech restrictions into America. And this is why this guy, either he gets deported and CCDH cannot operate in the United States, or they hold him accountable for perjuring himself for that interview in front of the House committee, because he did respond to a lot of those questions with a guilty mind, as he would like to say, using his own definitions of disinformation and misinformation. So we now have caught Imran Ahmed being deceitful on numerous occasions. I do think that it's worth the House committee to revisit this interview and call Imran Ahmed back to sit down and answer or explain himself for all these conflicting stories, especially the story around how CCDH came to be, because nobody is buying this shit that's being sold here now, especially when the company's House record indicates otherwise. And I really do hope that the U.S. government humbles this guy and that smug smile gets wiped off his face. Look, I don't care that this guy has an American wife and 2 children who are American citizens. Pack your bags and get out. Take your wife and children with you back to the UK. Now, it seems like the UK is more in line with your atheist values and authoritarian ideology. Go back to where you came from. We don't want you here. If you're not going to respect this country and what we stand for, get out. I'm not going to go through the rest of this speech because it's equally as irritating as the first 9 minutes. But what I will tell you is that this sanctimonious speech was not a serious analysis of trade-offs between having open discourse and real harms. Let's call it what it was. It was a rallying cry and a recruitment pitch for the permanent bureaucracy of content moderation, wrapped in this language of protecting democracy. He presents the choice as do nothing and let companies profit from outrage versus impose the accountability. The missing option, though, is restoring actual legal accountability for illegal speech, while fiercely protecting the broad zone of protected expression that Section 230 and the First Amendment were designed to safeguard in the first place. These sanctions and lawsuits against Imran and the people in his orbit are not evidence that accountability is biting. No, they are evidence that the previous regime's cozy relationship with activists, NGOs, and prior administrations is being completely dismantled and funding being cut off. Imran Ahmed and his hateful rhetoric thinks that what the Trump administration is doing to him is tyranny. But let me tell you something. America voted for this, and many Americans, including myself, call it long overdue pushback against an unaccountable censorship network that operated under the false pretenses of reducing harms, because these people are the ones who have caused a lot of harm. Just look to what Harry and Meghan did to us. Just look to what this guy did to the disinformation dozen. I really do hope that our judicial system prevails here and that this guy is taught a serious lesson not to mess with our God-given rights. And I really wish that more people would see how special the U.S. Constitution is and why it's so important to defend and protect it at all costs. We have threats like this who want to take away that protection of those freedoms that God gave us. That's all we're asking for. Leave us alone, Imran, Harry, Meghan. Just leave America alone. Let us do what we want. That's what has made America so great. And all those that just have taken our Constitution for granted, just pay attention to what's going on in the UK. Once you lose your free speech, you lose everything. And that's clearly playing out right now. And the king and the leaders don't give a shit. Do I want any of that? No. No, no, no. That's why I fight every day. That's all I got for you guys. Let me know what your thoughts are. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.
It was such a fraud.